Bobby and Mansfield, both, thank you so much for joining me. I know you've been reading what the papers are saying and perhaps listening to what some of the pundits have been saying. We don't have cameras inside those courtrooms, so we're having to rely on those folks that were in and the reporting that they've done. But let's start by rating the performances of both of the lawyers. I'll start with you, Bobby. What do you make of the prosecution's defense argument?
Good afternoon,
I'm sorry, the
Areva.
prosecution's closing argument. I'm sorry.
Prosecution's closing argument. Well, they went over a little bit over 4 hours. Apparently, it was a very protracted prosecution summation. Um, New York is a little bit different. In California, the prosecution goes first, then the defense, and then the prosecution gets a second bite at the apple. New York does it differently. The defense goes first, and then the prosecution goes. So it does make sense to me that the prosecutor would go longer than the defense, which went over 3 hours early in the morning. Apparently, from all reports, the prosecution did an excellent job. They summarized the case. They deflected. The main argument of the defense was that Cohen was a liar, and basically said kind of what prosecutors do in most cases, say, if you're dealing with the devil, then you have to take what the devil gives. And in this case, Donald Trump hired um, Michael Cohen. And so Donald Trump knew he was a liar, and he hired Michael Cohen because he was a liar. And ultimately, Cohen was forced to tell the truth because he was facing jail time. And basically, that happens in a lot of prosecution cases where you're dealing with individuals who are testifying based on a plea agreement or some sort of thing like that. Doesn't mean that they're necessarily lying. And I think that the prosecution did an excellent job of pointing out that their case doesn't stand alone with respect to Cohen. They pointed to tapes, they pointed to physical evidence, they pointed to critical conversations with key witnesses like David Pecker, who I think is a central figure here that not only talks about this whole catch and kill strategy, but the fact that ultimately he wasn't willing to pay the last time that Trump was wanting to catch and kill a case, which we know was Stormy Daniels. And he was the one who advised Michael Cohen how to proceed with respect to that. So I think all in all, the prosecution did an excellent job in terms of summarizing the evidence and calling the jury to use their own common sense to determine that, in fact, the only reason why Trump would have done this was because of the election. He didn't want the facts to get out, and he had the perfect fixer in Michael Cohen in order to take care of it.
All right. I think you're right. All those great points. And there's so much evidence, obviously, not just Michael Cohen. There's an overwhelming amount of evidence that was presented by the prosecution. Let me ask you, Mansfield, what do you make of the defense argument, particularly this one statement made by the lead lawyer for Trump? He said, every campaign in this country is a conspiracy. Hmm.
I just don't know if any criminal defense attorney could have uh, could have done any more than what this criminal defense attorney did. He put all of his eggs in one basket. He blamed Cohen, and he basically told the jury he's lied 1,000 times. So it defies belief that now all of a sudden he's telling the truth. But jurors sort of understand that people do that. We have experiences with people that have a reputation for lying, but sometimes we understand that they are absolutely telling the truth. And in this case, I think the prosecution has the edge on the criminal defense. It's the jury will not just look at the evidence in front of the court today and over the past several weeks, but even though they are told to, keep an open mind, they aren't told to keep a closed mind with
think we're having some technical issues with Mansfield. Let's try to get his audio worked out. While we do that, Bobby, let me ask you this. The defense made a huge uh, error, and I don't even think it was an error, it was an intentional statement. They made the statement about Donald Trump going to jail, and the judge was livid because there's no evidence here that anybody's going to jail. What do you make of that? I'm going to call it slip of the tongue by Trump's defense team.
Well, it wasn't slip of the tongue, Areva. It was clearly calculated to impress upon jurors who have a mindset that Trump could possibly go to jail and would be squeamish about returning a guilty verdict if they thought that this particular judge would sentence Trump to jail. We know that because of past statistics here, that it's unlikely that a judge would jail Trump solely on this. Now, we do know that the judge was upset with Trump with respect to his, continual violation of gag orders. So there's a slim possibility that he could be jailed. If he is jailed, it won't be for long because Trump being in jail causes so many problems that I don't think the criminal justice system could handle Trump being in jail, for certainly not for a long time. But this defense attorney played upon that fear to try to have a chilling effect on the jurors, that they wouldn't come back with a jury verdict of guilt, just so they could avoid the possibility of being the jury that sent Donald Trump to
Yeah, that could obviously backfire on the Trump team, Mansfield. There may be some folks saying, "Hey, I want to be that person that sends a former president to jail. That might get me a book deal, might get me a lot of fame and notoriety." But Mansfield, you said this defense team placed all of its eggs in one basket, and that was the Michael Cohen is the greatest liar of all times. Tried to play on that term "goat" into gloat. Was there a different strategy? Could there have been another strategy based on the evidence that was presented? Because I do feel like Bobby, that's a big risk because you can throw Michael Cohen out and there was still lots of other evidence. Do you think the defense should have spent more time talking about that other evidence and not just assuming that this whole case was just about Michael Cohen?
So the problem when you're defending someone like Mr. Trump, who has a lot of baggage, it's hard to say that you can put on a defense and have character witnesses. In a criminal trial, you can ask character witnesses to come and testify for your client as attesting to his good character. Well, I think we all sort of, take a pause and say, wait a minute, what could someone say about Mr. Trump and his good character? And then you look at the witnesses. He only called two witnesses. He called an attorney that was again, a criminal defense attorney sometimes do not control their witnesses. And in most situations, whenever I've had an attorney testify in a deposition or otherwise, those are the worst individuals to try to control what may come out of their mouths. And the attorney that they called in Trump's defense made a big mistake. He was arrogant. He upset the judge. No doubt he upset the jury. Jurors are looking in any kind of trial, civil or criminal. They're sort of looking at the judge to take cues as to, do you think this guy is telling the truth, or are you concerned about this? And they build a relationship with the judge in every trial. And when that attorney that was called by the defense to testify on Trump's behalf attacked the judge and showed arrogance, I mean, in a sense, it was the same kind of behavior that we're used to seeing Mr. Trump engage in. And so I think that backfired. Now, could they have called a financial person to deal with the financial documents that were used to show that this money was spent this particular way? Could they bring in their person in charge of finance? Well, he's in prison for perjury. So this was an entirely impossible situation for the defense. Now, lastly, Could they have taken the
Let me
risk?
ask you this, Mansfield. What about a lawyer? Could they have brought in a lawyer that either was general counsel for the corporation or maybe was outside counsel to talk about if it, I mean, this is assuming that these facts existed, that maybe they review the services provided by Michael Cohen and they did constitute legal services or something to give more credibility to this argument that these were legitimate legal services?
You know, I'm sure they thought about that, and I'm sure they decided we can't get an attorney who is judged by a much higher standard than the average lay witness. We cannot get an attorney to walk the plank for Donald Trump, because once he starts walking that plank, then you're open to cross-examination. And then who knows what kind of Pandora's box is opened. And who knows if you inadvertently open a door that the criminal defense wanted to keep shut. So this was just a terrible situation for a criminal defense attorney to handle. And also there was some criticism about the criminal defense attorney in that he used to be a prosecutor. No slight on you, Bobby. You gave a good introduction. But he was a prosecutor and didn't do apparently a lot of criminal defense work and not a lot of cross-examination. Well, that's really not true. Prosecutors do a lot of cross-examination, but they criticized this particular criminal defense attorney performance and said basically he didn't muster up to the task of doing a good cross-examination on the prosecution's witnesses. And then you had a client who had press conferences every day inside the courthouse. Please explain to me somewhere during this show, Areva, have you ever seen permission granted to any defendant to have a press conference in the lobby of a courthouse?
No, except this one, who the lawyers, a lot of the criticism of the attorney is not that he's not a qualified attorney, but that he was playing to an audience oftentimes of one and was doing things to push the envelope and, you know, get the ire of the judge, not like he would do that in a normal case that he would be involved in, but because when you represent Donald Trump, you have to do that. You have to go outside the bounds of, you know, which we usually work in as lawyers. You have to do things like Bobby said, mention prison time when you know that that's impermissible in a closing argument, but you do it because you know it's going to, you know, get the excitement of your one client. And Trump is notorious for saying his lawyers are too soft, they're too weak. And, you know, a lot of the yelling apparently that Trump's attorney was doing was, again, to try to impress Trump, because they associate yelling with somehow being strong or, you know, somehow being, I guess, an alpha man. So the louder you are, the more, you know, the tougher you are. So I'm not giving excuses for this lawyer, but we can understand the predicament, as you said, Mansfield, that he was in. You got a lawyer, you got a client that's talking. You won't shut up, won't listen to anyone. So it's a very challenging, but obviously he's getting paid a lot of money. Big boy. He knew what he was doing when he took the case. He knew how Trump treated all of his other lawyers. So we don't need to feel sorry for him. But I do question whether the closing argument, and maybe both of you agree, there wasn't a lot of room for him, a lot of places for him to go other than to try to beat the Michael Cohen. And maybe if you hate Michael Cohen enough, maybe you'll hate the prosecution. Bobby, you think that's where they were going? Like, maybe if we can convince them that this prosecutor brought you this lawyer, this lying lawyer into this courtroom, and you should punish the prosecutor for even, you know, having the nerve to bring Michael Cohen in and suggest that he is someone that should be believed. Think about that, Bobby. When we come forward, I want to get your take on what might be the strategy behind the defense just really, really hammering the credibility of Michael Cohen.